Hey guys, tonight we're setting sail on a journey not for the faint of heart or stomach, for that matter. Close your eyes for a moment, if you dare, and imagine the relentless roll of a wooden ship beneath your bare feet. The salt spray stinging your eyes, and the pungent aroma of tar, sweat, and something indefinably rotten clinging to the air. The creak of the timbers, the flap of canvas overhead, the distant cries of gulls. It's all so incredibly real, isn't it? Now, picture yourself standing on that deck, a mere speck in the vast, unforgiving ocean, surrounded by a crew of hardened, desperate men with even harder morals. The sun is blazing, but you shiver, not from the cold, but from the chilling realization that your cozy, modern comforts are a million miles away, and your chances of seeing them again are, well, slim to none. You probably wouldn't last a day on a pirate ship, let's be honest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, why not drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see just how far our little community stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're waking up, not in your comfy bed, but on a splintered, flea-ridden deck, the rough hemp of a coiled rope digging into your back. Your head throbs, a dull ache that echoes the relentless sway of the ship. This isn't a bad dream. This is your new reality. You've been recruited. The romanticized image of swashbuckling adventure quickly dissipates as the crude reality hits you like a cannonball. Forget signing up voluntarily. For most, joining a pirate crew was less a career choice and more a sudden, violent conscription. Press ganging was the order of the day, particularly for merchant sailors. One moment, you're enjoying a pint in a seedy waterfront tavern. The next, a hefty blow to the head, and you wake up miles out to sea, a new, unwelcome member of a pirate fraternity. There was no HR department, no onboarding process beyond a grim chuckle and a command to get to work. Historians still argue whether pirates actively sought out specific skills when press ganging, or if it was simply a matter of snatching any able-bodied man they could lay their hands on. While a skilled carpenter or a seasoned navigator would certainly be valuable assets, sheer manpower was often the primary requirement. They didn't need you to be enthusiastic. They just needed your arms and legs. You might have been a baker, a cobbler, or even a gentleman of leisure yesterday, but today, you're a deckhand, and your new job description involves obeying orders or facing dire consequences. It's the ultimate sink or swim scenario, though sink and then swim for a bit until you drown might be a more accurate description of your prospects. You quickly learn that yesterday's soft hands are today's targets for blisters and splinters. The concept of choice simply evaporates. You're on a pirate ship now, and your life is no longer your own. There's no resignation letter, no 2 weeks' notice. Your contract is written in fear and sealed with the threat of the lash. The grim truth is, many pirates were not dashing rebels fighting for freedom, but desperate men caught in a brutal system, forced into a life of crime by circumstances often beyond their control. You might be dreaming of a heroic escape, perhaps clinging to a barrel and floating back to shore like some kind of maritime Rambo. But the vast, empty expanse of the ocean offers little comfort and even less chance of survival. The sea is a cruel mistress, and she doesn't care for your dramatic Hollywood fantasies. As your initial shock begins to dull, replaced by a growing sense of dread, you start to take in your surroundings. This isn't the grand, majestic ship of your imagination, bristling with polished brass and immaculate rigging. Oh no, this is a pirate ship, and it's a floating coffin in all but name. You're crammed into a space that feels less like a vessel and more like a sardine can with sails. Below deck, the air is thick and suffocating, a noxious cocktail of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, bilge water, and the omnipresent, sickly sweet scent of unidentifiable rot. There's no natural light, just the dim, flickering glow of a single, caged lantern casting dancing shadows on the grimy bulkheads. Every heave of the ship sends you sliding across the slick, uneven planks, your only hope of stability being to grab onto whatever rough-hewn beam or frayed rope is within reach. The quarters, if you can even call them that, are an exercise in extreme minimalism and maximum discomfort. You're probably sharing a hammock, or more likely, a shared patch of floor with half a dozen other men. Personal space is a forgotten luxury, and privacy is a concept as alien as a flushing toilet. Hammocks, a relatively new innovation in the 17th and 18th centuries, were certainly better than sleeping directly on the deck, but they offered little solace from the constant jostling and the pervasive damp. The sound of snoring, coughing, and the occasional retching is your new lullaby. You might even find yourself sharing your sleeping quarters with a healthy population of rats, who, unlike you, seem to find the ship quite amenable. These weren't your cute city rats. These were robust, seafaring rodents, likely carrying more diseases than your average modern-day clinic. One mainstream historical fact you'd quickly learn is that disease was a far greater killer than combat aboard these ships. More pirates succumbed to dysentery, typhus, and the dreaded scurvy than to cannon fire or cutlasses. The close quarters, poor hygiene, and lack of fresh food created a perfect breeding ground for every malady imaginable. You're breathing the same air as a dozen sick men, using the same shared bucket for calls of nature that is then summarily dumped overboard, and drinking water that has been stored in stagnant casks for weeks, if not months. It's less of a ship and more of a giant petri dish on the move. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates from disease were primarily due to initial poor health of recruits or the rapid spread within the confined environment. Either way, your immune system is about to get a crash course in extreme survival. A quirky tidbit that might make you grimace is that pirates, like all sailors of the time, often had to contend with the problem of lice and fleas. There was no hot water for bathing, and laundry days were non-existent. Many sailors resorted to techniques like boiling their clothes, if they had a spare set, or even trying to smoke out the critters by sitting near fires. You'd probably find yourself engaging in what was affectionately known as cricket hunting, picking the tiny parasites off your body and clothes. Fun for the whole family, right? Your skin will constantly itch, not just from the rough fabric of your borrowed clothes, but from the unseen creepy crawlies making a home on your person. So much for that clear complexion you used to pride yourself on. It's like a permanent, very aggressive mosquito bite that follows you everywhere. And the smell? Let's just say you'll quickly become accustomed to the concept of eau de pirate, a fragrant blend of unwashed bodies, stale rum, and desperation. With the grim reality of your new living quarters setting in, your stomach begins to rumble, a dull, persistent ache that quickly reminds you of another fundamental aspect of pirate life: the food, or rather, the distinct lack thereof. Forget your artisanal sourdough, your gluten-free options, or even a simple piece of fresh fruit. Your diet aboard this floating death trap is a testament to the sheer desperation and practical limitations of life at sea. Your primary sustenance would be hardtack, a brick-like biscuit made of flour and water, baked until it was so hard it could crack teeth. This wasn't a culinary delight. It was a survival tool. It was often infested with weevils, tiny beetle larvae, which you'd quickly learn to pick out or, more realistically, simply eat for the extra protein. You'd develop a sophisticated palate for identifying which weevils were still alive, adding a delightful crunch to your meal. Alongside the hardtack, your other staple would be salted meat, usually beef or pork, preserved in barrels. This meat, often months, if not years old, would be tough, incredibly salty, and frequently riddled with maggots. The smell alone would be enough to put off a modern appetite, but hunger, as you'd soon discover, is a powerful motivator. A quick rinse in seawater might wash off some of the surface grime, but it wouldn't do much for the overall quality. You'd come to appreciate the days when a fresh catch, perhaps a dolphin or a shark, was hauled aboard, offering a temporary reprieve from the monotony of salt and biscuit. And then there's the drink. Fresh water was a precious commodity, quickly growing stale and slimy in wooden casks. To make it palatable and to help preserve it, it was often mixed with alcohol, creating grog. This concoction was typically a watered-down rum, sometimes with a dash of lime or lemon juice if they were lucky enough to have any. While the rum might have provided a fleeting sense of warmth and bravado, the lack of fresh, clean water and the absence of vitamin C from fresh fruits and vegetables would inevitably lead to the scourge of the seas: scurvy. Scurvy, a mainstream historical fact, was a terrifying and gruesome disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. You'd start to notice your gums bleeding, your teeth loosening, and old wounds reopening. Then would come the lethargy, the swollen limbs, and finally, the internal bleeding and eventual death. It was a slow, agonizing process. Historians still argue whether pirates were more or less susceptible to scurvy than naval sailors, given their often erratic supply lines, but the fact remains it was a constant, debilitating threat. The only cure was fresh citrus, a luxury rarely available on long voyages. Imagine your body slowly falling apart, piece by piece, while all you have to eat is a weevil-infested cracker and some questionable meat. It's like a really, really bad detox diet, where the end result is less glowing skin and more excruciating agony. A quirky tidbit is that some pirates believed eating rat meat could help prevent scurvy, perhaps due to the rats consuming various scraps that might have contained trace amounts of vitamins. While scientifically unsound, in their desperate fight against the disease, sailors would try anything. So, if you were lucky, you might occasionally find yourself sharing a meal with a roasted rat. Bon appetit! And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, you remember that the cook's hygiene standards probably consisted of "don't drop it on the floor too often." Having somewhat adjusted to the horrific menu and the constant gnawing hunger, your body, surprisingly, begins to demand activity. An activity you shall get. Forget leisurely mornings or quiet contemplation. Life on a pirate ship is one of endless drudgery. From the moment the sun peaks over the horizon, if you're even aware of its rising from below deck, you're thrust into a relentless cycle of physical labor. Your hands, already raw from rope burn and salt water, will quickly become calloused and cracked, a permanent testament to your new, miserable profession. One of your most frequent tasks would be swabbing the decks. This wasn't just for cleanliness. It was to remove salt, grime, and anything that might make the deck slippery during a storm or battle. You'd be on your hands and knees, scrubbing with crude brushes, the constant rocking of the ship making every stroke a test of balance. And it wasn't a one-and-done job. The sea is relentless, and so is the dirt it brings. You'd find yourself repeating this task multiple times a day, your back aching, your knees protesting, wondering how you ever complained about vacuuming your living room. At least your vacuum doesn't try to bite you. Then there's the rigging. You'd be expected to climb the mast, often hundreds of feet high, to mend torn sails, untangle ropes, or scan the horizon for other ships. This isn't a leisure climb at your local gym with safety harnesses and a soft landing mat. This is a precarious dance with death, high above the churning waves, with only thin, rough ropes to grasp. One wrong foot, one sudden gust of wind, and you're plummeting into the unforgiving ocean. The canvas sails themselves were incredibly heavy when wet, and pulling them up or down, or adjusting them to catch the wind, was a Herculean task requiring synchronized effort from the whole crew. It's like a perpetual, high-stakes game of tug-of-war, where the rope is thicker than your arm and the stakes are your life. A mainstream historical fact you'd quickly internalize is that pirate ships required constant maintenance. Wood rots, ropes fray, and sails tear. Every man on board was expected to contribute to the ship's upkeep, regardless of their previous profession. You might find yourself assisting the ship's carpenter, patching holes in the hull, or helping the sailmaker sew up massive rips in the canvas. There were no specialists for every tiny task. Everyone was a generalist out of necessity. This blend of roles means you might be swabbing decks one moment and then being handed a needle and thread the next, expected to perform tasks you'd never dreamed of attempting. A quirky tidbit is that some pirates would use shark skin as a rough form of sandpaper for cleaning and polishing wooden surfaces, particularly the decks. Imagine scrubbing away the abrasive texture of dried shark skin scraping against the grime, knowing that the very creature it came from likely still lurks in the waters below. It's an efficient, if rather primal, tool. Historians still argue whether the constant labor on pirate ships was purely disciplinary or genuinely necessary for ship efficiency. But for you, it would simply be an exhausting reality. Your body would become a machine, albeit a very tired and sore one, constantly moving, constantly working, with little time for rest or reflection. Sleep, when it came, would be a collapse, not a gentle drift. As the sun beats down or the rain lashes across the deck, you realize that while you're constantly working, you're also constantly, well, dirty. The concept of personal hygiene on a pirate ship isn't just a challenge. It's a losing battle. Your modern sensibilities about daily showers, fresh clothes, and a good scrub would be laughed off the plank. You're living in a world where fresh water is for drinking, not washing, and soap is a rare luxury, if it exists at all. Imagine the stench. Your clothes are perpetually damp, salty, and encrusted with grime, sweat, and perhaps a dash of vomit from the constant motion of the waves. You're wearing the same outfit, day in and day out, until it practically disintegrates off your body. There's no washing machine, no dry cleaning, not even a simple bucket and washboard. Any attempt to clean your clothes would involve a dip in the ocean, which, while perhaps momentarily refreshing, would leave them just as salty and even damper. You'd quickly realize that your definition of clean has dramatically shifted from spotless to doesn't actively stink of something dead. Bathing? That's a fantasy. A quick rinse from a bucket of seawater might be the closest you come to a shower, and even that is a luxury. You're constantly sticky from the salt. Your hair is matted and greasy, and your skin feels perpetually gritty. And this isn't just about feeling uncomfortable. It's a serious health hazard. Without proper hygiene, minor cuts and scrapes, which you'll acquire constantly from the rough work, quickly fester and become infected. Remember those rats and their fleas from Section 2? They're still there, and they're thriving in this unwashed environment, making your life even more miserable. It's like living in a perpetual camping trip where no one brought the bug spray or the soap. A mainstream historical fact is that vermin were an unavoidable part of shipboard life. Rats, lice, and fleas weren't just nuisances. They were carriers of disease. The same rats gnawing on your hardtack were also spreading pathogens that could lay an entire crew low. Controlling them was a constant struggle, often involving cats, if they could keep them alive, or even professional rat catchers on larger vessels. But on a pirate ship, resources were limited, and the focus was on survival, not pest control. So, expect to share your bunk, and perhaps even your dinner, with these unwelcome guests. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the desperation is that sailors would sometimes use tar or grease mixed with ash to clean their skin, believing it had antiseptic properties. It probably just made them smell even worse and clogged their pores, but in the absence of real soap, you tried what you could. Historians still argue whether some of the peculiar sailor remedies for skin ailments were genuinely effective or merely folk remedies passed down through generations. What is certain is that your skin, once pampered, would become a landscape of rashes, sores, and bites. Your appearance would transform from a well-groomed individual to someone resembling a salty, disheveled scarecrow. And the relief of stepping onto land, if you ever did, would be almost entirely negated by the overwhelming urge to strip off every stitch of clothing and immerse yourself in the nearest available body of fresh, clean water. With your body aching from endless chores and your skin a landscape of grime and bites, you might begin to entertain thoughts of rebellion, or at the very least, a quiet refusal to follow orders. This, you would quickly discover, is a grave miscalculation. Pirate ships, despite their reputation for lawlessness, operated under a strict, albeit brutal, code of discipline. Your life, and indeed the lives of your shipmates, depended on obedience, and transgressions were met with swift and often agonizing justice. Forget due process, legal representation, or a kindly judge. On a pirate ship, the captain, or sometimes the quartermaster, was judge, jury, and executioner. Their word was law, backed by the implicit threat of violence from the rest of the crew, who also had a vested interest in maintaining order. There was no appeal process, no higher court to turn to. Your fate was sealed the moment the decision was made. It's like a really aggressive HOA meeting, except instead of a fine for unkempt hedges, you get flogged. One of the most common forms of punishment, a mainstream historical fact, was flogging. This involved being tied to a mast or a grating and whipped, often with a cat o' nine tails, a whip with multiple knotted thongs designed to tear flesh. The number of lashes would vary depending on the perceived severity of the offense, but even a few could leave you scarred for life, if not permanently disabled. Disobedience, theft from a shipmate, falling asleep on watch, or even a perceived disrespectful glance could earn you a date with the lash. The pain would be excruciating, a burning fire across your back, and the humiliation would be profound. And the worst part? You'd be expected to go back to work immediately afterward, bleeding and battered. A more severe punishment, often reserved for desertion or serious insubordination, was marooning. This involved leaving the offender on a deserted island, often with only a pistol, a small amount of water, and perhaps a shot of rum. The pistol was usually given so the individual could end their own suffering rather than face slow starvation or dehydration. It was a terrifyingly lonely death, a testament to the pirate's grim sense of justice. Imagine being left on a tiny speck of land in the middle of nowhere, watching the ship that was your only link to civilization sail away, knowing your fate is sealed. It's like the ultimate timeout, where the consequence is a lingering, agonizing demise. A quirky tidbit is that sometimes, for minor offenses, pirates would subject offenders to a gauntlet or running the ropes. This involved the crew lining up on either side, armed with rope ends or small sticks, and the offender being forced to run between them while being struck. It was less about severe injury and more about public humiliation and ensuring compliance. Historians still argue whether these forms of brutal discipline were effective in fostering true loyalty or simply fear. For you, however, the distinction would be academic. All you'd understand is that defying authority on a pirate ship was a sure path to an early, unpleasant demise. Every creak of the deck, every shout from the captain, would serve as a chilling reminder of the ever-present threat of severe retribution. Your survival depended entirely on your ability to subsume your will to the collective, no matter how degrading or painful. Having successfully avoided the lash and the lonely fate of marooning, for now at least, you find your gaze often drifting upwards, not in hopeful prayer, but in an attempt to understand the incomprehensible dance of the stars above. Navigation on a pirate ship was a skill so vital, and yet so utterly alien to your modern, GPS-reliant mind, that it would fill you with a profound sense of helplessness. There were no glowing screens, no satellite signals, just the vast, silent expanse of the ocean and the celestial bodies above. Your phone, if it somehow survived the journey and had a signal, would be utterly useless out here. You'd quickly realize that finding your way across the boundless sea relied on an intricate understanding of the heavens, a knowledge that generations of sailors had painstakingly accumulated. The main tools of the trade were rudimentary at best. A sextant, or more likely, a simpler backstaff or quadrant in earlier pirate eras, to measure the angle of the sun or stars above the horizon, and a compass to determine direction. While these tools sound straightforward, using them accurately on a constantly pitching and rolling deck, often under cloudy skies, was an art form. A mainstream historical fact is that determining longitude was the greatest navigational challenge for sailors in this era. While latitude, how far north or south you were, could be found relatively easily by observing the height of the sun at noon or the North Star at night, longitude, how far east or west you were, required precise timekeeping. Without accurate chronometers, which weren't widely available or affordable until the late 18th century, sailors relied on dead reckoning, estimating their position based on their last known location, speed, and direction. This was inherently inaccurate, leading to ships often being hundreds of miles off course, sometimes with disastrous results. Historians still argue whether pirates, due to their often clandestine nature, relied more heavily on captured charts or on their own practical, though often less precise, navigational skills. For you, the sheer uncertainty of it all would be a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. A quirky tidbit is that some sailors would carry lodestones, naturally magnetized pieces of magnetite, to remagnetize their compass needles if they lost their polarity. Imagine frantically rubbing a rock against your only reliable directional tool, hoping it would point true again, while a storm brews on the horizon. It's like trying to fix your smartphone by giving it a good shake, only with much higher stakes. The very idea of steering a massive wooden vessel across thousands of miles of open water with such basic tools, constantly hoping you weren't about to run aground on an uncharted reef, would be terrifying. You'd find yourself staring at the stars with a newfound intensity, not for their beauty, but for their cryptic, life-or-death pronouncements. The sun, once just a source of warmth, would become a celestial clock, its precise zenith vital for your very survival. Your entire existence would be dictated by the subtle movements of the heavens, a celestial ballet you were completely unprepared to interpret. Just as you're starting to get the hang of deciphering constellations, a cry rings out, "Sail ho!" Instantly, the ship is transformed from a floating work camp into a vessel of war. Your brief moments of quiet stargazing are shattered by the deafening roar of voices, the frantic scrambling of feet, and the chilling realization that your life is about to become a chaotic, brutal test of survival. You are about to experience the terrifying reality of close-quarters chaos, where the weaponry is as crude as it is deadly. Forget precision long-range sniping. Pirate combat was often a messy, visceral affair. Your primary weapon would likely be a cutlass, a short, heavy sword designed for slashing and hacking in confined spaces. This isn't the elegant dueling rapier you might see in movies. It's a brutal, functional tool for dismembering opponents. You'd probably receive a quick, rudimentary lesson in how to swing it, focusing on sheer brute force rather than fencing finesse. Imagine trying to wield such a weapon on a pitching deck, with smoke billowing around you and bodies falling on all sides. It's less a choreographed dance and more a frantic, desperate scramble. Alongside the cutlasses, flintlock pistols would be common, though notoriously unreliable. They were single-shot weapons, slow to reload, and often misfired in damp conditions. A pirate might carry several, firing them off in quick succession before resorting to his cutlass. Then there are the cannons, the heavy artillery of the seas. These weren't precision instruments. They were designed to blast holes in enemy hulls or shred rigging. The sound of a cannon firing next to you would be deafening, the recoil enough to knock you off your feet, and the sheer destructive power would be horrifying. You'd likely be part of the gun crew, hauling heavy cannonballs, sponging out the barrel after each shot, and risking life and limb with every discharge. A mainstream historical fact you'd quickly grasp is that boarding was the preferred tactic for pirates. They wanted to capture the ship and its cargo intact, not sink it. This meant a ferocious, hand-to-hand struggle on the deck, where numbers and sheer ferocity often triumphed over skill. Imagine a melee where men are slipping on blood and water, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear, and every swing of a weapon is aimed at ending a life. There's no time for chivalry, no space for mercy. You're fighting for your life against desperate men, often just as reluctant to be there as you are. It's a brutal, frenzied dance of survival, where your survival depends on your ability to inflict more damage than you receive. A quirky tidbit is that some pirates would dip their cutlasses in urine or other foul substances, believing it would make wounds more likely to become infected and thus more deadly. While perhaps not scientifically sound, the psychological impact on an opponent, knowing a cut could lead to a slow, agonizing death from infection, would be considerable. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or merely anecdotal. For you, in the thick of the fight, such details wouldn't matter. All that would count is the glint of steel, the roar of the cannons, and the desperate, primal urge to survive. The memory of the chaos, the screams, and the metallic tang of blood in the air would linger long after the battle ended, if you were lucky enough to survive it. You've survived the battle, perhaps with a few new cuts and bruises, but the adrenaline rush soon fades, replaced by a fresh, chilling dread. Any injury, no matter how small, becomes a terrifying prospect on a pirate ship, because you're about to discover the gruesome reality of medical care. Amputation station. Forget sterile environments, anesthetics, or even basic antibiotics. Healthcare on the high seas was a brutal, desperate affair, often doing more harm than good. The ship's surgeon was rarely a formally trained physician. More often, they were a cook, a carpenter, or simply the most experienced person on board who had seen a few broken bones or nasty cuts before. Their medical kit would be rudimentary. A saw for amputations, a knife for lancing boils, perhaps some bandages, a bottle of spirits, for the patient or the surgeon or both, and maybe a few herbal remedies of questionable efficacy. It's like a really bad reality TV show, where the doctors are untrained and the stakes are your limbs. A mainstream historical fact is that amputation was the most common solution for severe limb injuries. A compound fracture, a musket ball wound, or a deeply infected cut could quickly turn gangrenous in the unsanitary conditions. The only way to save a life, in their limited understanding, was to remove the offending limb. Imagine being strapped down to a rough table, perhaps in the dim, rolling light of a lantern, with no pain relief beyond a swig of rum or a blow to the head, while a saw grinds through your bone. The screams would be horrifying, a sound that would haunt the ship for days. And even if you survived the surgery, the risk of infection was incredibly high, often leading to a slower, more agonizing death. This wasn't about healing. It was about preventing further rot. A quirky tidbit that would make you wince is that the surgical instruments, especially the saws, were rarely cleaned between patients. They might be rinsed in seawater or wiped on a dirty rag, but the concept of sterilization was centuries away. So, the same saw that just amputated one man's leg might be used on your arm moments later, carrying with it all the bacteria and infection from the previous procedure. It's like a really gross regifting scheme, where the gift is a potentially fatal infection. Historians still argue whether some ship surgeons, despite their lack of formal training, developed an intuitive understanding of basic wound care through sheer repetition. However, for you, facing a nasty gash, your chances of recovery would be grim. You'd quickly learn to hide even minor injuries, attempting to bandage them yourself with whatever scraps of cloth you could find. knowing that reporting them could lead to a fate worse than the initial wound. Every fever, every swollen joint, every painful cough would send a shiver of fear down your spine, knowing that you were utterly at the mercy of crude practices and rampant disease. Your body, already a battlefield of bruises and bites, would now be constantly under threat from within, silently battling unseen microscopic enemies that, in your era, would be easily vanquished with a trip to the doctor. On a pirate ship, however, a simple infection could be the final, painful chapter of your short-lived career. With the constant threat of injury and disease hanging heavy in the salty air, you find yourself increasingly aware of the unseen forces that seemingly govern life and death on the open sea. Forget scientific explanations or rational thought. On a pirate ship, superstition reigns supreme. Every creak of the timber, every unusual wave, every strange cloud formation could be interpreted as an omen, a sign from the mysterious powers that held sway over their destiny. Your modern, logical mind would be bewildered by the sheer depth of their beliefs, but you'd quickly learn to keep your skepticism to yourself. Sailors, and pirates especially, lived in a world where the vast, unpredictable ocean was both their livelihood and their gravest threat. This constant peril fostered a deep-seated reliance on rituals, charms, and folklore to explain the inexplicable and provide a semblance of control. You'd quickly learn the unspoken rules. Never kill an albatross, for it carries the soul of a dead sailor. Don't start a voyage on a Friday, for it brings bad luck. And never, ever whistle on deck, as it might whistle up a storm. Ignoring these seemingly innocuous rules could earn you the ire of the entire crew, who would genuinely believe your actions jeopardized their lives. It's like a really intense game of don't step on a crack, where stepping on one means everyone drowns. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread belief in sea monsters. From giant squids, like the legendary Kraken, to mermaids and serpent-like creatures, sailors often reported encounters with fantastical beasts. These weren't just campfire stories. They were genuinely held beliefs, sometimes fueled by misidentification of real marine life or the psychological effects of long voyages and isolation. You might find yourself staring out into the murky depths, convinced that every shadow or ripple was the telltale sign of some monstrous leviathan rising from the abyss, ready to drag the ship, and you along with it, down into the inky blackness. A quirky tidbit that might make you chuckle nervously is the common superstition about carrying a pierced coin for good luck and to ward off evil. You might see pirates with a hole drilled through a silver coin, wearing it on a string around their neck or wrist, believing it offered protection against drowning or cannon fire. Imagine clinging to a tiny piece of metal as a storm rages, convinced it's the only thing keeping you from a watery grave. Historians still argue whether these superstitions provided genuine psychological comfort or merely a dangerous sense of false security. For you, they would be an undeniable part of daily life, influencing every decision, no matter how small. You'd witness crewmates refusing to shave their beards before a battle, believing it brought bad luck, or tossing a coin into the sea to appease the angry spirits of a storm. Every creak of the ship, every shift in the wind, would be scrutinized for signs, and the slightest deviation from the norm would send murmurs of apprehension through the crew. Your initial amusement would quickly fade, replaced by a genuine understanding of the desperate need for belief in a world where control was an illusion and survival was a constant prayer. The sea, in their eyes, wasn't just water. It was a living, breathing entity, capable of both immense generosity and terrifying wrath, and best appeased with respect and a healthy dose of fear. After weeks, perhaps months, of endless toil, questionable food, and the constant threat of disease or the gallows, a new cry pierces the monotonous routine. Land ahoy! The excitement on board is palpable, a collective surge of desperate hope. You're about to experience the fleeting, often debaucherous, reprieve of port calls, a temporary escape from the brutal confines of the ship, quickly followed by the inevitable return to sea. Stepping onto solid ground after such a long voyage would be a sensory overload. The smell of fresh earth, distant cooking fires, and unfamiliar flowers would assault your nostrils after the constant brine and bilge. The feeling of stable ground beneath your feet, rather than the relentless roll of the ship, would be disorienting at first, like walking on a trampoline that's not quite level. You might find yourself swaying instinctively for hours, even on firm land. These port calls were rarely idyllic vacations. They were opportunities for pirates to resupply, repair the ship, and, most importantly, blow off steam and spend their ill-gotten gains. Taverns would be overflowing, their raucous laughter and slurred songs spilling out into the narrow, crowded streets. Sailors, freshly paid or having just looted a merchant ship, would indulge in every vice imaginable. Women, ale, gambling, and brawling would consume their brief moments of freedom. You'd witness scenes of unrestrained revelry, often spiraling into violence as tempers flared and too much rum flowed. It's like a really wild frat party, but with cutlasses and the constant threat of being arrested. A mainstream historical fact is that pirate havens, like Port Royal in Jamaica or Tortuga, became notorious hubs where buccaneers could openly spend their loot and find refuge. These settlements operated on the fringes of colonial law, often with the tacit approval or turning of a blind eye from corrupt governors who benefited from the pirates' wealth. For you, these would be places of temporary salvation, a brief return to something resembling civilization, even if it was a very rough-around-the-edges version. You could enjoy a hot meal, perhaps even buy a fresh shirt, and momentarily forget the horrors of the voyage. A quirky tidbit is that some pirates, when coming ashore, would indulge in the habit of drying out their hammocks and bedding on shore, laying them out in the sun to kill lice and air them out. Imagine the spectacle of a pirate ship's entire bedding laid out on a beach, a clear sign of their unhygienic existence. Historians still argue whether the perceived lawlessness of these pirate havens was exaggerated or if they truly operated as independent states outside conventional rule. Regardless, you'd quickly learn that the freedom ashore was a double-edged sword. While it offered relief, it also provided ample opportunities for trouble, from drunken brawls to being cheated out of your share of the loot. And the constant lurking danger of being recognized by naval patrols or bounty hunters would add a layer of tension to even the most festive occasion. You'd always have one eye over your shoulder, knowing that this reprieve was temporary, and the open sea, with all its dangers and deprivations, was waiting. You've spent your meager share of loot on a few precious moments of shore leave, maybe a warm meal, and a temporary escape from the stench of the ship. But as you trudge back to the dock, the ship looming large and ominous, your mind inevitably wanders to the glittering promise that fueled so many pirate legends: buried treasure. You've heard the stories, of course, of chests overflowing with gold doubloons, sparkling jewels, and precious artifacts hidden away on remote islands, waiting to be unearthed. But the truth, you'd quickly learn, is far more mundane, a stark contrast between myth and reality. Forget the elaborate treasure maps with X marks the spot. Those are mostly the stuff of fiction, popularized by authors like Robert Louis Stevenson. In reality, pirates rarely buried their treasure. Their life was one of constant motion and immediate gratification. When they captured goods, they typically divided them up quickly and spent them just as fast, often in those debaucherous port calls you just experienced. Money, for them, was a means to an end, not a long-term investment strategy. It's like finding a $20 bill in your old jeans. You don't bury it, you buy a coffee. A mainstream historical fact that dismantles the buried treasure myth is that pirates primarily targeted goods that were easily traded or consumed. This meant things like sugar, tobacco, rum, spices, textiles, and sometimes even slaves. Gold and silver coins were certainly valuable, but they were usually part of a larger cargo, not the sole focus. Storing large quantities of heavy coins on a ship was impractical, and the idea of burying them implied a long-term plan that few pirates, living day-to-day under the threat of capture and execution, ever truly entertained. Why bury it when you can spend it now on a fresh pint and a good time? A quirky tidbit that adds to the practicality of their choices is that pirates often prized medical supplies and navigational instruments as highly as, if not more than, gold. A working quadrant or a fresh supply of quinine could mean the difference between life and death on the open sea, far more valuable in their immediate circumstances than a chest of unwieldy jewels. Imagine finding a box of fresh bandages and antiseptic and thinking, jackpot! That's the reality of pirate priorities. Historians still argue whether the few instances of buried treasure, like Captain Kidd's alleged hoard, were truly representative or merely isolated anomalies that fueled a powerful, enduring myth. For you, the reality would be that any treasure you acquired would be a small share of practical goods or a handful of coins, quickly spent or gambled away. The romantic notion of digging up a chest of glittering riches would be a distant, almost laughable fantasy amidst the daily grind. The true treasure for a pirate was a successful raid, a full belly, and another day of freedom from the gallows. And as you reboard the ship, leaving the temporary luxuries of land behind, you'd realize that the only things truly buried were your hopes for a quiet, comfortable life. Your future was not one of retirement on a tropical island, but of constant peril and fleeting pleasure. Back on the high seas, the fleeting memories of your port call already fading like a dream, the grim reality of your situation returns with full force. Your mind, weary from constant fear and labor, might drift to the ultimate fantasy: escape. But the cold, hard truth is that on a pirate ship, escape was a faint hope, a whisper on the wind that rarely materialized into anything more concrete than a fleeting thought. The vast, unforgiving ocean was both your prison and your potential executioner. There were essentially two primary ways one might escape a pirate crew, neither of them particularly appealing. The first and most obvious was desertion. This would involve slipping away from the ship, likely during a port call or under the cover of darkness. But think about the logistics. Where would you go? How would you blend in? Most ports were teeming with naval patrols, bounty hunters, and former shipmates who might recognize you. You'd be an outsider, a marked man, likely with no money and no connections. And if caught, the punishment would be swift and brutal, far worse than anything you've experienced so far. Remember marooning from Section 6? That's probably the best-case scenario for a captured deserter. A mainstream historical fact is that pirate ships were often heavily armed and constantly on guard, making any direct escape incredibly difficult. Watches were kept, and suspicious behavior would be quickly noted. A pirate crew relied on cohesion, albeit through fear, and any sign of disloyalty was met with extreme prejudice. Attempting to steal a longboat, for instance, would be a suicidal mission, as the alarm would be raised almost immediately, and you'd be hunted down with extreme prejudice. The vastness of the ocean, once a symbol of freedom, now loomed as an impassable barrier. Even if you somehow managed to get away in a small boat, your chances of surviving the elements, navigating to safety, or finding fresh water and food were astronomically low. It's like trying to escape a maximum security prison by simply walking out the front gate, except the front gate is 1,000 miles of shark-infested waters. The second, even less likely, form of escape was rescue. This typically meant being captured by a naval vessel or another, more legitimate ship. While this might seem like salvation, it often just traded one form of captivity for another. You might be pressed into service in the Royal Navy, a life that, while legal, was often just as harsh as, if not harsher than life on a pirate ship, with equally brutal discipline and long, arduous voyages. Or, worse still, you could be brought to trial where your involvement with pirates, willing or unwilling, would be held against you. The gallows awaited many who found themselves in this predicament. A quirky tidbit that highlights the desperation is that some sailors, driven to the brink, would resort to self-mutilation, cutting off fingers or toes, to make themselves unfit for service and thus be discharged. Imagine the sheer horror of purposefully maiming yourself just to escape a life you hated, knowing the pain and potential infection that awaited. Historians still argue whether such extreme acts were truly effective in securing release or simply led to further suffering. For you, the sheer hopelessness of it all would be a constant, nagging companion. Every horizon would look the same, every passing ship a potential captor, and every day a struggle to simply survive without drawing attention to yourself. The dream of freedom, once so vibrant, would slowly wither under the relentless sun and the unyielding expanse of the sea. You've navigated the perils of recruitment, endured the squalor, suffered the brutal discipline, and even survived a few skirmishes. But as the days turn into weeks and months, a chilling certainty settles over you. The end is coming. For a pirate, there were generally two paths to oblivion, the gallows or a watery grave. Neither offered much comfort, and both were far more likely than a quiet retirement on some sun-drenched isle. Let's consider the gallows first, a mainstream historical fact that awaited many captured pirates. If your ship was successfully cornered and defeated by a naval vessel, or if you were unlucky enough to be identified and apprehended during a port call, perhaps after that ill-fated attempt at desertion from Section 13, you would be brought to trial. These weren't trials designed for justice as we understand it today. They were largely spectacles, meant to deter others from a life of piracy. Evidence would be scant, defense non-existent, and the outcome almost always predetermined. You'd be quickly condemned, your fate sealed before you even stepped into the courtroom, if there even was one. Public executions were a common sight, designed to be a grim warning. Imagine standing on a scaffold, the jeering crowds below, the hangman adjusting the noose around your neck, and the last thing you see is the vast, uncaring ocean that was both your life and your undoing. The process was often drawn out, a deliberate performance of power. Sometimes, after execution, bodies were gibbeted, hung in cages along the coast as a macabre deterrent, slowly rotting in the sun and wind, a horrifying monument to what happened to those who defied authority. It's like a really bad performance art piece, where you're the unwilling star and the critics are literally hanging around. The alternative, and often more common end, was a watery grave. The sea, your constant companion, would eventually claim you. This could happen in countless ways. Drowning during a storm, being swept overboard by a rogue wave, succumbing to disease and being unceremoniously buried at sea, or being killed in combat and falling into the depths. There was no headstone, no final resting place beyond the vast, cold embrace of the ocean. Your body would become food for the fish, your existence swiftly erased by the currents. It's the ultimate anonymous burial, with no one to mourn your passing or even mark your existence. A quirky tidbit that reflects the grim reality is the practice of weighted burials at sea. When a pirate died, especially from disease, their body would often be sewn into a canvas shroud, weighted down with cannonballs, and then committed to the deep. This was not out of reverence but practicality, to prevent the body from washing ashore or becoming a navigation hazard. Historians still argue whether pirates often performed any specific rituals for those lost at sea, beyond the hurried burial, or if their lives were too brutalized for such niceties. For you, the sheer inevitability of one of these two fates would cast a long, dark shadow over every sunrise. Every storm would be a reminder of your fragility, every passing ship a potential harbinger of the gallows. There was no true escape, only a countdown to an inglorious end. So, you've lived your days, however few or many, as a pirate. You've endured the squalor, tasted the hardtack, weathered the storms, and perhaps even glimpsed the inside of a courtroom before your inevitable end. Now, as the curtain falls on your unwilling adventure, you face the final, quiet truth. Your legacy will be one of forgotten footprints. In the grand tapestry of history, your brief, brutal existence as a pirate would likely leave little to no lasting trace. Unlike the famous captains whose names still echo through the centuries, you were but a nameless cog in a machine of chaos. There would be no grand monuments erected in your honor, no epic poems sung of your deeds, and certainly no historical markers commemorating your final resting place, whether it was the bottom of the sea or an unmarked grave beneath a gallows. Your life, lived on the fringes of society and law, would simply fade into the vast, anonymous record of countless other forgotten souls. A mainstream historical fact that underscores this anonymity is that most pirate crews were composed of common sailors, often poor, desperate, or forced into the life. Their stories rarely made it into official records, which focused instead on the notorious captains or the powerful merchant interests they plundered. You wouldn't find your name etched in a ship's log, beyond a brief mention as a crew member, and certainly not in any grand history books. Your identity, once perhaps a proud marker of your heritage or profession, would be subsumed by the generic label of pirate, a footnote in someone else's narrative. It's like being an extra in a massive historical drama, where you're not even credited in the end. Your family, if they even knew what became of you, might mourn your disappearance, but they would likely never truly know the horrors you endured or the way your life ended. The separation would be complete, a final, unbridgeable chasm between your old world and your new, brutal reality. Your story, if told at all, would be whispered in hushed tones, perhaps as a cautionary tale for wayward youth, not as a heroic saga. A quirky tidbit is that while some pirate crews kept articles or codes of conduct, even these rudimentary records rarely listed every man by name, focusing more on shared rules and punishments. It was the group, the collective, that mattered, not the individual. Historians still argue whether the anonymity of many pirates was a deliberate strategy to evade capture or simply a consequence of their transient, lawless existence. For you, the result would be the same: a profound sense of unimportance in the face of the overwhelming forces that shaped your short, violent life. As the imagery begins to fade, and the salty tang of the sea gives way to the familiar comfort of your own space, take a moment to truly appreciate the simple luxuries you possess. The soft pillow beneath your head, the warmth of your blanket, the steady hum of modern life outside your window. These are treasures beyond anything a pirate could ever dream of. The silence, broken only by your own calm breathing, is a stark contrast to the constant creak and groan of a ship, the shouts of the crew, and the endless roar of the waves. Let the harsh images of hardtack and flogging, of disease and the gallows, gently recede. Feel the tension in your shoulders ease, your breath deepen, becoming slower, more even. The pirate's world was one of constant struggle, a relentless fight for survival. Your world, tonight, is one of peace and safety. Drift now, letting go of the salt spray and the fear. Allow the sounds of the night to become a comforting lullaby. You are safe, you are warm, and you are far, far away from the dangers of the high seas. Rest now, truly rest.